for coming out to the tent here on this beautiful night. If you need mosquito spray, it's over on the table. Even though I did give it a dusting this afternoon, I can't be responsible for every mosquito coming by. And anytime, get up. There's snacks in the cooler. There's ice cream over there, so don't hesitate to get up and get something during the presentation. This is a very interesting program tonight. We're excited about it, and we hope you really enjoy it. Jon has worked very hard to assemble all this very tedious information, but a fascinating story he has to tell tonight. And after the program, we will address the new information about Nan Britton, so we will do that, but we're going to do our wonderful program first. So without further ado, here's Jon.
Well, I am very glad that everyone could come and join us, and we'll try to work with the microphone. I'm not a big microphone person usually, I'll be very honest. So if it doesn't work out, well, eventually I'll probably ditch it and we'll just talk really loud. But anyway, working on this program, this has been about a 14 to 16 month project for me. And I will tell you right now, this is not going to be the prettiest of stories because of content, and as well as trying to condense it to have it make sense. So there's not really a clean order. I'm just going to give you the heads up on it. We're going to introduce various people, the important players in the story, and then we're going to dive into some of the meat and potatoes of some of our figures we're going to be meeting tonight. Attorney General Harry Daugherty, his special assistant Jess Smith, a person that I would be surprised if a lot of you know, Howard Manington. Some of you may know who he is, many may not. And the mysterious Roxy Stinson with Gaston Means. So we will do our best to kind of shuffle that in. Jess? But what we need to figure out, hey, that's how it works. Hey! But to figure out first, we need to just start deciphering fact versus fiction. Up top there, you're going to see the photos of Warren and Florence being depicted through HBO's Boardwalk Empire. That's Malachi Cleary and Jacqueline Knapp, and as you can tell, they both look absolutely nothing like Warren or Florence. But they are portraying them in very different lights than as we know him, and that's one of those things I do want to express throughout this show, this program. Boardwalk Empire is a riveting show, very entertaining, very exciting, but they like to bend the facts to what suits their program the best. And in their case, they wanted to show Florence as a paranoid woman wandering the room, waiting for the psychic to tell her when to breathe and who's going to die next. And Warren was the idiot that didn't know what he was doing unless Harry Daugherty told him to. And we all know that is not the case. Although there are days when I think Harry Daugherty would like to think otherwise. And we'll go through that as well. So, first, for those of you who are not aware, what is Boardwalk Empire? It's basically a show depicting bootlegging, sex, drugs, everything else in the roaring 1920s, and primarily focusing around Atlantic City, New Jersey. And Atlantic City during this time is one of the major port hubs of the rum running and the bootlegging. So a very intricate part of this Prohibition era is Atlantic City. And right there we have actor Steve Buscemi, who plays Nucky Thompson. He's one of the leading characters. At one point he's the treasurer of Atlantic City and kind of one of the kingpins of the bootlegging area of that. Jess? He's based off of Nucky Johnson. So they got really creative changing from Thompson to Johnson. Or Johnson to Thompson, sorry. Now, Enoch Johnson is pictured on the right there, and they're very similar. Certain aspects, for example, they made sure to have Steve Buscemi's character always have a red carnation in his lapel. Enoch Johnson was the same way. Except Johnson is a little nicer than Thompson. Johnson is doing corrupt things. He is with corrupt people, but he does give more to the people that's around him. In the TV show, you see that in Steve Buscemi for probably the first season, but after that, he goes off on his own little gangster ways. The real Nucky Johnson was a little bit more sharing of his wealth, as what the quote says, when I lived well, everybody lived well. And when he was high in the hog, he shared it around. Now, that didn't necessarily happen when he eventually goes to prison for all of his bootlegging deals, and when he comes back out, nobody wanted to help him, because at that point he was untouchable. but he still is the basis for what we're going to be talking about today. Along those lines, the show does hit into various gangsters. We have pictures up there. These are the actors portraying Al Capone. We have Lucky Luciano, Arnold Rothstein, and I can never remember his name because it drives me nuts, but Meyer Lansky. For some reason, I keep on wanting to give him different names. Those are the real people, the actual ones, and actually we did a pretty good job of hitting these people as opposed to what we saw with Warren and Florence, and which is very nice with it. But again, the show just kind of gives you a flavor of gangster life in the 1920s, the bootlegging and whatnot. But how much can we believe? Now, this is where it gets a little choppy sometimes, because in this case, we can see, this is an actual photo of Nucky Johnson with Al Capone. They are literally skipping down the boardwalk of Atlantic City. Now, the actual Nucky Johnson, who was earning up to $500,000 a year, and modern money, that's $5 million a year, is what he's bringing in through bootlegging, is a member of what's called the Big Seven. And the Big Seven's a group of bootleggers, which includes Al Capone. So there is a lot more fact scattered in, but anyone that's watched the show will see that it strays real hard, real fast, and then tries to trickle back in. But what I want to focus on is the characters that really do are dealing with Warren Harding and the Harding administration. That leads us to our first person we do have to introduce, Harry Daugherty. Now, Harry Daugherty, in this case, in the show, he is played by Christopher McDonald. He is an actor that kind of bounces around. You've seen him in a couple bit roles and things. He was in Happy Gilmore as the evil golfer against Adam Sandler. Is the last thing I can think of really major that he did. But he does actually a decent job of portraying Harry Daugherty as an arrogant person that's trying to be that puppet master from behind the scenes. And we're going to try to start digging into his background a little, and let's try to figure out what makes this person tick. But Harry is known, again, for his arrogance. He is the first one to tell you, no, please don't pay attention to me, I'm nobody. But hey, I'm really important, look at me. And that's how he's always been. So in his own words from his own book, we should probably start off with a quote dealing with him of, I lay no claim to infallibility or sainthood. As a humble member of the Methodist Church, I sometimes fall from grace, ask the Lord to forgive, and try again. I can only promise to speak from the fullness of personal experience and deep conviction. And we will do our best to watch Harry fall from grace and sainthood and hopefully pick himself back up. So we got to figure out a little bit about Harry's background here. He's born January 26, 1860 in Washington Courthouse. That's south of Columbus, for those of you that are not familiar. Washington Courthouse really hasn't changed much in the last 100-some-odd years. If you go down there, you'll see a lot of the same buildings and whatnot, so I invite you to go down there at some point. It's like looking at living history. His father is John Daugherty. He's a farmer, a tailor, and he's going to die of diphtheria in 1864. Diphtheria, for those of you who are not aware, is a bacterial infection that starts off looking almost like strep throat or chest cold. Very hard to diagnose. But in the same week, Harry's father dies, as does his brother, from diphtheria. And they're so scared of Harry also catching it. He does get a very mild case of it. And this is one of those health things. Harry's always had a long-standing issues with health. And it starts with him as a child. And he tries to kind of build it up as he goes from there. He will go to the University of Michigan to get a law degree. And the reason he chose the University of Michigan, he says, is because it's reasonable, a good college, and it's cold. Because he believes that the cold weather is going to help him fight off the diphtheria that he had as a child and hopefully keep his health. What can I do for Gil?
The courthouse, Washington Courthouse, is the mirror image of the Marion County Courthouse. It's built by, well, the architects were the same. But if you go down, and it looks just everything like your own neighborhood, because it's exactly what we have here.
The only difference is Amos Clayton didn't help with the Washington Courthouse as he did in this town. Although, give Amos a shot, I guarantee you he'd be happy to run down there. But Harry is going to be raised by his mother, Jane Draper Daugherty, along with his brother, Mal. Mal is kind of an interesting figure. He will pop around at different times riding on Harry's coattails. But he is a member of the Washington Courthouse community. We'll touch on him a little bit more later. Harry never finished his primary school. He has to go to work at a young age to try to support his mother and his brother. And we talked about him going off to college at University of Michigan to achieve a law degree. He marries Lucille Walker in September of 1884, and Lucy's very frail, very poor health, and that's something that's kind of always been one of Harry's issues that he's always had to deal with. He tries very hard to take care of her, and no matter where he goes, he tries to take her with him. When he moves out to Washington, D.C., he selects the hotel he lives in because it's within a reasonable distance of Johns Hopkins, where he does take his wife, for she has extremely bad arthritis, to a point that she actually, they did at the time, a revolutionary approach for it of dealing with the issue. They actually crack her knee bones. Because they were so calloused and so much calcium in there, they cracked them, put them back together, and tried to get her to develop walking from it again. She only does it once, and it is actually very successful, but she is in so much pain that she can't even stand to walk or try, so that she ends up abandoning it. And you'll see letters later on that Harry is going back and forth saying that he is just so sad that he just hopes that Mrs. Daugherty can just walk again. And it says Mrs. Daugherty has been an invalid for 10 years. If she could only walk, she would be fine. She was fine mentally, but just physically she was so drawn, and he is always so devoted to her throughout all his life, which is a surprising thing because Harry can be a slimy individual, but he's very devoted to his wife. And at one point he's asked, well, why don't you remarry after she passes away? And he says that having found one who never had fault, I was afraid of the chance after she was called, and I can't recommend myself for anyone else. So Harry was well aware of his shortcomings as well, and he held Lucy at almost like a sainthood type of area. But Lucy also came with a bonus for him. She is cousins to Joe Foraker's wife. Joe Foraker is a political boss of Ohio, and that kind of helped springboard him a little bit with relationships to get up into Republican politics later on in life. Can everyone still hear me despite not having the microphone? Because I think I'm losing track of trying to carry this thing, so we'll save the batteries. So we're going to talk a little bit about his law career. We did discuss that he attends the University of Michigan. He graduates at age 20. He's too young to take the bar exam, so he comes back to Washington Courthouse and starts apprenticing in a local law firm to start developing a little bit of experience before he could take the bar, which he does pass. And he starts building a really successful law practice in both Washington Courthouse and Columbus. And after a while, he just kind of ditches Washington Courthouse and heads to Columbus, the big city, as a chance to really develop his career. Now, what really gets his career going and makes a name for himself is dealing with the Colonel Coit case. What ends up happening is there's a riot in Washington Courthouse. There's a Negro man, as they described him, an African-American gentleman, that raped and murdered a woman in Washington Courthouse. He is arrested, and they hold him in. They're going to hold him for trial, but the people of Washington Courthouse want to riot to get him out and hang him, lynch him publicly, because they're so outraged. So they protect him by locking him inside of the courthouse. Fearing major issues, Governor McKinley sends out the National Guard, led by Colonel Coit, and the rioters are banging on the doors, saying that they're going to break down the doors. They're coming at them, and Coit orders a controversial fire through the door at the crowd. And you can see down there, the doors are there today. They are still there. Where you see the little spots of lights are the bullet holes from 1894. They're still there today. I dragged my pregnant wife down there to look at these bullet holes. It was very exciting. I felt bad for her, but they were exciting for me. So that was his controversial attempt of getting into the law in Washington Courthouse. And he makes a name for himself because William McKinley personally selects him as an up-and-coming Republican to defend the National Guard, and he is successful at it. Colonel Coit is acquitted of his controversial decision to fire upon the crowd. Now, he builds up a little bit more clout. He starts working with the railroads. He's the personal attorney for the B&O Railroad in Central Ohio. And he tells the story bitterly that he never charged a woman for any legal work. And he said his wife often farmed him out to various women in the neighborhood. So if there was ever a problem, they'd come knocking at his door. And he was so upset of all the money he lost out on because he had to do these pro bono work for his wife. So we got to start looking at his political career a little bit. And this is where you're going to see some long lists here. And I'm not going to go through every single one of them. I want you to kind of see the magnitude of these people. That's more why I have it up there than anything. Down in the bottom right, you see Joe Foraker. He is one political boss I did discuss. His wife is cousins, with Harry Daugherty's wife. And up top is Mark Hanna. Hanna and Joe Foraker are feuding political bosses of Ohio. And Harry Daugherty, being the slimy guy he is, jumps sides when it's convenient for himself. When he sees Foraker being a sinking ship, he jumps to Hanna, and that ticks off Foraker. But Hanna's okay, but Hanna's people don't trust him. And this is going to be a long-term effect for him politically, that he's trying to get all these positions, and he's up and coming. He's never lost an election in Fayette County. He's very successful down there. He's a member of the Ohio House of Representatives. He ends up being the chair of the Ohio Republican Central Committee, and he's going up into the conventions. He is becoming a face of Ohio politics and Republican politics in Ohio. But he starts getting a setback because of making these little games of jumping sides. Because along those lines, he lost positions and opportunities. He really wanted to be governor, and he thought he had a shot in 1899. And he shot down because Joe Foraker's camp was bitter and made sure that there was no chance of him getting a nomination. And Hanna's people didn't quite trust him either to put him up for nomination. He runs for U.S. Senate in 1916. The exact same thing happens again. That different sides, no matter which one he's on, they don't trust him and they don't like him. So he's always kind of batted down. But they still know he's very valuable. So you'll see that he's getting offered various appointments through the presidents. President Taft wants to name him the chair of the Republican National Committee. He turns it down. He's offered district attorneys in Ohio. He turns it down. And all sorts of federal appointments, still turns it down because he didn't like what they paid. And he had said, I wanted to make more money than a judicial office pays to make sure that he can take care of his family. Money is a driving force in Harry Daugherty. You may read his words and he'll say that he really cares about the people. He cares about his friends that he works with. At the end of the day, Harry really does worry about money, and his career reflects that. Well, this is going to lead us to our next character. You got a taste for Harry Daugherty. He's an up-and-coming Republican, not afraid to throw people aside and use people to get him to that point. This leads us to his close friend, Jess Smith. He is played by, thank you. He's played by Ed Jewett in HBO's series Boardwalk Empire, and you can look, they look absolutely nothing alike. And for those of you that have seen the show, they portrayed Jess Smith as a sniveling, whiny individual that can barely stand on his own 2 feet. And in particular, I want to try to introduce how Jess Smith isn't that. I'm not saying he's the macho go-getter guy, but he's not this sniveling, whiny crybaby that they portray him to be. Okay. He is also born in Fayette County down in Washington Courthouse. The Daughertys know him quite well. And there's 12 years difference between him and Harry. They do become very close friends. And folklore is always that they were boyhood friends, that they grew up together, and it's not true. That's a myth that's floating around Fayette County. Spent a lot of time down there with the Fayette County Historical Society, and after digging through some of their own papers and whatnot, things don't quite add up. And I can't imagine 12-year-old Harry Daugherty hanging out with infant Jess Smith and developing a budding relationship at that point. But who knows? Jess Smith's father, Oswald Smith, is the town sheriff, briefly, but he's still the town sheriff at one point. He's got his mother, Laura E. Smith. He has one sister, Chloe, who dies at age 15. She's very ill as a child. In fact, on the census, when they are taken out, they actually make a point to mention her being not present for the census because of being ill, that the census taker didn't even want to go into the room to ensure that she was actually present. I've never seen that in a census before. It's very interesting. Then you can see that the guy writing it made a big effort to fill out the entire line, that ill, not present. In his youth, as a teenager, he goes out to Tennessee to study under his uncle, a William Peitzer. William Peitzer runs a very, very successful department store in Tennessee, one of the most successful in Tennessee, and he apprentices under him to develop his own trade. And he comes back to Washington Courthouse to open the Smith department store, which is viewed as one of the leading department stores in the Midwest. Get this? That picture on the right is an advertisement, a photo of his store with the slogan of everything for everybody. You can see he has his big picture for one of his big sales. He does a biannual sale. Come on in. Let's see, take a look what we got. He's got a big upholstery department. That is his favorite department. He is very big on upholstery. On the left, you'll see it's a zoomed-in photo of the bottom right corner. We can see Dapper Jess standing there and some of his stationery from his store. Jess Smith is very, very popular in Washington Courthouse. You do not have a social event unless Jess Smith comes to it. And Jess Smith, when it's raining, he is known to have the ladies in town rush into his store, and he's going to keep them dry and gossip about news in town, which is starting to lead to some of the issues of stories of that perhaps he had a little extra sugar in his tea than some of the other gentlemen in town, which we're not quite sure about that one either. But he is known for being very kind, very generous, and after his death, there was an interview down at Washington Courthouse, and someone asked him, what do you remember about Jess Smith? And someone said he was always spending money to make someone else happy. He was the kind of chap who, if you met him on the street and told him your wife was sick, he would beat you home with a bunch of flowers. That he would try so hard to be known as that man that was always pushing to just be so helpful, so happy, and he was very successful. And it's almost mind-boggling because we're going to see how his relationship with Harry Daugherty goes, and it doesn't match up. This man that's running a successful business in Washington Courthouse does not match the man that works with Harry Daugherty. This is the store today. It is still standing. It is quasi-condemned, but it is up for rent. I did meet the owner. He is very happy to take any offers as long as you meet his minimum price. That is extremely high, and I don't remember what it is, and I don't want to throw out anything that's too awkward. But the paint is still there very, very faintly, and that's why I try to highlight on the right. You can still make out the E of every is still there. So if you make it down to Washington Courthouse, it's across the street from the courthouse, you can still see it, which is still it's kind of cool. It's kind of, again, that snapshot of history down there in Washington Courthouse. All right. Got a taste of Jess. Like I said, this is getting this awkward part. We need to introduce these people so the story makes sense. We now need to meet a Miss Roxy Stinson. Roxy Stinson is born in the Dakota Territory, and she comes to Washington Courthouse with her family. She has an air of importance about her. She is not wealthy, but she is considered well-to-do in the area. Her father did work for the U.S. Land Office for the government, and was very successful, and that's why he was out in the Dakota Territory. He was a part of the land surveying as well as the purchase and sales of land. Comes back to Washington Courthouse. His wife, Eldora, who's pictured in the left of that double photo up there. Eldora, the mother, is on the left, and Roxy's on the right. And you have another picture of Roxy down below. They try to kind of elevate Roxy. She is considered the most beautiful woman in Fayette County by many, many people. And her mother, Eldora, wants her to become cultured and sends her overseas for finishing school in Germany. And when she comes back, she is very well-versed in the classics, very well-versed in music, and they actually open the Stinson Conservatory of Music together, Eldora and Roxy. And there, Roxy is teaching vocal harmony, piano, French, and German. Now, why do we worry about Roxy? There's a peculiar relationship. Jess Smith and Roxy Stinson are married November 10th, 1908. Now again, Roxy, very high standing in Washington Courthouse, marries a man that is a little bit questionable of how feminine or masculine he may be, but very successful. But they married November 10th, 1908, very surprised. Eldora, her mother, hates it. Absolutely hates it. And there's also stories that Jess's mother did not approve for various reasons. And it seems like Jess's mother didn't like that she was too high and mighty. She was too European for the town of Washington Courthouse. And then Eldora believed that Jess was a little too off the beaten path for what she'd expected a husband for her daughter that's so cultured would be. The marriage lasts for 18 months, and they divorce. Roxy files a divorce and says that files it for gross neglect. But they actually become closer friends after their marriage. And Roxy is going to accompany Jess to just about everything. If Jess is there, Roxy is there as well. And this includes, eventually, for the inaugural dinner, Roxy is sitting right next to Jess Smith in Washington, D.C. for that. Roxy is his confidant. Every time he comes back to Washington Courthouse, he makes sure to stop and see her. He also gives her money regularly still. And I don't know whether this may be because of feeling obligated, because at one point it was her husband. But there's this strong connection that I've never quite put my finger on it. If they're divorced for gross neglect and all this animosity, I've never understood why there's so much connection. It's almost like he couldn't let her go. And there's also a thought that Harry Daugherty might have gotten in the way. Jess Smith, very close to Daugherty, may have been kind of viewed as a rival to Roxy, and maybe she didn't like that either. But we'll talk a little bit more about their interesting relationship as well. But this leads us to an interesting part. The Stinson Conservatory of Music is on the second floor of Jess Smith's store. So his divorced wife works upstairs, and so does his ex-mother-in-law. Now, again, meeting the owner, I got a chance to walk around up in the condemned building, so I highlighted what floor we're looking at. Up top left there, that's the main conservatory hall. I couldn't get too much farther in because you take one wrong step, you do feel the floorboards completely giving out on you. And that also goes as well, the bottom left side is the there's practice rooms. The Conservatory of Music, the Stinson Conservatory of Music was very successful for a brief time. People were taking trains to Washington Courthouse, staying for a week, training, and these little practice rooms are where they would stay for the week. But oddly enough, they had a half bath, and that's what they were all sharing while they were there. So I would have figured that would have been kind of an awkward living arrangement, but they still did it. Now, the part that's funny with a lot of these pictures is the owner of the building did not want to walk up anywhere. He basically opened the gate, said, "Good luck. It's not my fault if something happens to you." So I went up there and did the best I could without killing myself and see where it goes. But it's a strange building because if you see, these are stairs right about here, and you just walk up the stairs. It's an open area, and those doors on the right greet you. They go into the conservatory, the main conservatory hall, and there's just hallway corridors next to it and another set of stairs that leads us to the next floor. This is the third floor, and this is where Roxy Stinson lived with her mother. So now, not only do you have your ex-wife and ex-mother-in-law working above you, they're also living on the third floor. And to make it a little bit more fun, Jess Smith owns the building. So he wants them to live there, and I've never seen any evidence of him charging them to live there. So it's, again, very interesting relationship. But these are their private quarters. The owner of the building assures me that that toilet and that bathtub down there was used by Roxy Stinson. He assures me of that. So if you look there, you now can all say you're one of the few people that can actually say you saw Roxy Stinson's toilet. So congratulations to you all. But Roxy's kind of an interesting person along with this building as well, because Roxy, we're going to explore a little bit, goes into a weird direction, but there's always this belief that she had a lot of money hidden somewhere from all these bootlegging deals, and that after Roxy died, and you can see a little bit on the left side, if you look at the top left picture, there's that bucket, and then down below there's a board that's kind of raised. The owner at the time, current owner's father, went around prying up floorboards sporadically, looking for money, just in case something was there. And the owner tells me that they do it about once every 3 years. They kind of go around just in case if there's something hidden up there. And he has told me nothing is hidden up there, and I severely doubt they're going to find anything. But that's, you know, I guess it's kind of fun to go up in a condemned building and look for money. So. Now this takes us to the interesting relationship between Harry Daugherty and Jess Smith. They are very, very close friends. The Daugherty brothers, both Harry and Mal, help Jess establish his business in Washington Courthouse. Now Mal is working with the local bank in Washington Courthouse. He is able to help procure loans and funds for Jess Smith to continue to operate his store. Harry Daugherty offers that support. He's a rising political figure in the town still, very prominent, and Jess likes to ride that rush. He never asks for any money. He doesn't want anything. He just wants to be with Harry and help Harry. And there's these letters between the two of Harry saying, Jess, I need you to come where I am immediately. I cannot sleep at night knowing you're not nearby to help me. And again, there's nothing out there that says that there's a gay relationship between the two. It just is one of those things that really does seem like they're just very close. There's an intimacy between the two, but not to that level. But it doesn't help that Jess, again, kind of portrays certain aspects to make you question some of these things. But Jess does worship Harry to an extent that he wants to be there. And like I said, this might be one of the issues with Roxy. Roxy might have sat there saying, I'm your wife. Why are you more concerned with what's going on with Harry? And there are times where you see letters of Roxy saying, Jess, I need you to come back and help me with some of these documents. We have a joint venture we need to work on. And he'll send a letter back saying, well, I'll get there in a while. Harry needs me in Illinois. I got to go with him. She'll send the next letter. No, we need to take care of this in the next 2 weeks. I'll be there as soon as I can. And he'll come on the very last day because that's the day Harry reluctantly lets him leave. It's very strange. And Jess and Harry are going to live together in the Wardman Park Hotel. Again, seems peculiar. This is out in Washington, D.C. when he does take office as the Attorney General. Jess is there kind of to be that aide to Harry. He answers mail. He actually is the one that physically is paying the bills. When there's issues with Harry's wife, he takes care of her. And he'll help get her around while Harry's taking care of business. He's that missing partner that he needed to help him get through his day, both as an administrative and personal. And that was kind of what built up their relationship. All right. Next guy we need to figure out. This is Howard Manington, the mystery man of the Ohio gang. And I doubt many of you have heard of him. And it took a heck of a lot of work to find photographs of this man, because he kind of fades into the background. What you're looking at is actually a photograph from the Baltimore Sun in 1926. It's an original negative that they put out there for his return from Europe. We're going to explain his adventures out in Europe a little bit later. But Manington has kind of developed an information even as early as yesterday. Some more information popped up. This is a never-ending research. If something else pops up while reading, we continue to build it. But he's a very intriguing man. To figure out a little bit background about him, he's born in 1868 in Waynesville. He's the son of a farmer, Lewis Manington, and he's the youngest of 8 children. He is raised in the Ohio Soldiers and Sailors Orphans Home, and that's a picture of it down there on the right. Anything you do find about Howard Manington tells this horrible story about how his father and mother both died while he was an infant, and he was left nowhere to go, and he stayed at the orphanage. And since his father served in the Union Army during the Civil War, he was allowed to take part of that, I guess, education and housing at the orphanage home. You go through the records. I found the records talking about his father. His arm got ripped off in a thrasher working on the farm. Father doesn't die. The mother dies. Father doesn't. The father remarries and ditches his son at the orphanage. Very standard practice back then. But of the 8 children, the father only keeps the one daughter around, and Howard was the youngest, and the daughter was 4 years older, but he did not have any interest in keeping Howard along with him. Very big misconception. You can find anything about him. But Howard seems to take this within stride and runs with it. He becomes what the Xenia Daily Gazette says is one of the most prominent graduates of the home. It stays as a member of the Board of Trustees. He works as the president of the Ex-Pupil Association. He wants to continue the legacy that helped start him on his career. Again, long lists. And the reason I want this up there is to see he is very successful. He gets into the newspaper business. He is the secretary. He is working for the Secretary of State. At one point, he tries to run for Secretary of State, and it was considered controversial because he wasn't really a major figure in the political scene, that he says, I'm tired of where this is going, I'm bowing out. But he is a Secretary General of many commissions. He's running groups dealing with coal, river transportation, railroad transportation. So he's a part of major industries, especially in the Midwest. And you start seeing really fast, this is an important man that you kind of want to have in your corner. and why Harry Daugherty might want to have him around with him as a close friend. But he is also a close friend of Joseph Foraker, and again, we've seen Foraker again, major political player, and if you're close with him, you're getting somewhere. But the part that's always been interesting to me is he's always cited as a lawyer in newspapers, but I cannot find any proof of him going to law school or having any private practice, but he's always described as a lawyer, which has been stuck in my craw for quite a while. And that leads us to Warren G. Harding. Now, where does Warren fit into this? Harry meets Warren in Richwood, Ohio at a speaking engagement, but Warren's probably heard of him before that. Again, they're both running the Republican circuit. Harry's moving up higher and higher in the party. Warren is doing the same. They know each other. They've heard of each other. And Warren probably met Jess Smith through Daugherty, but also through his engagement with the Elks Lodge. Jess Smith at one point is the president of the entire state of Ohio Elks. So if Warren's a member of the Elks, he probably knows who Jess Smith is. Now, who knows how close they may have been at one point or another, but they're familiar with each other. And then Howard Manington was an editor at one point of the Urbana Times-Citizen. So chances are they knew each other through the newspaper business. So they all kind of have a taste of knowing one another. So, finally, we figured out all the people. Thank you for bearing through that. Now you have the knowledge of understanding where we're going. So, let's take it to that next step with the 1920 convention. Harry Daugherty, being high in the Republican Party, close friends with Warren G. Harding, does take on the role of his campaign manager. And we need to start getting the convention going in Chicago. Daugherty has this big movable part plan of how to arrange releasing delegates, getting delegates, let's get people into the city of Chicago, where can we go? On the right, you're going to see the 1920 convention in Chicago. Manington is there, so is Jess Smith. Manington is in charge of making sure he rounds up all the delegates of the southern states. Jess Smith is in charge of all the northern delegates, and Harry Daugherty is kind of running in between, trying to pull pieces and negotiate things. But Daugherty's also flipping the bill for a lot of these things. He is spending $750 a day for 10 days to house Warren and his group at the Chicago convention out of his own money. Well, he claims it's his own money, but who knows where that's really coming from. But Harry, again, he's there for Warren. He'll tell you he's there for Warren, but he wants to make sure you know that people treated me as if I was the candidate. And it seems to me they didn't find out Harding was the candidate until we got to Chicago, because he's that important. But Howard Manington beat them all to Chicago. He was the first person to set up the headquarters in Chicago for Warren, and he wasn't viewed very well in the news. And I think the reason I want to share it is just because it gives me a giggle. The Lima News made sure to point out that Howard Manington's there, and it's so crazy because Warren Harding's never going to get elected. But they said, and I quote, "Bless his fat soul, he will not have many delegates to watch." So it's just kind of, you're seeing how these people are being viewed. But Daugherty, again, is wheeling and dealing on the backside. And I want the big example to show you is Jake Heyman. And Fayette County Historical Society had this photo on the top left. That's Jake Heyman in the middle. There's Harry Daugherty on the left, Jess Smith on the right, and then behind it is the house right next to us. Jake Heyman is the head of Republican politics in Oklahoma. And Daugherty wants to get Heyman to back he wants to back Daugherty, but he wants to back Harding. So he goes to Jake Heyman, who's very, very successful, and says, "I'm going to promise you a cabinet seat." And in the end, Heyman never takes him up on the offer, but Daugherty always claims, "I never promised anyone a cabinet seat," throughout the entire election. But we got contradictory things. Heyman saying, "I was promised a seat." Daugherty saying, "I never promised you anything." And the only reason that issue was never really pushed is Heyman, Jake Heyman was a senator in Oklahoma, and he had a mistress himself. And eventually, the Republican Party said, "Jake, you can't keep on taking your mistress everywhere. You're going to eventually have to take your wife somewhere with you." So when he's going to Washington, they say, "Please take your wife with you," even though Jake planned to leave his wife at home. And he informs his mistress, "I'm sorry, my wife is coming with me to Washington, D.C." Mistress is very upset. And one night, Jake is actually having a poker game in his hotel, and he's playing, and the mistress comes in all upset, saying, "We need to talk immediately." And Jake tells his associate, "Please take her upstairs. I'll be up there in a little bit." So he goes up there to talk with his mistress, who's so upset. She was so upset that she shot him right in the stomach. Jake is still alive, though, and Jake tells his associate, get her out of here, because they're going to find out about her. Get her out of here. And she runs her to the Mexican border. And then she gets captured at the Mexican border and comes back, and thankfully Jake dies before anything else can come from it. So, again, why is Jake important? You're seeing the seedy people in these politics that Harry Daugherty's working with. And it's very interesting moving parts to this. But this is going to lead us to the biggest example of the Warren G. Harding story, The Smoke-Filled Room. Harry Daugherty is not afraid for you to think he maybe did the smoke-filled room, maybe this happened, but I didn't do it, but I was there, but I wasn't there. Colonel George Harvey there, he is the editor and the owner of Harper's Weekly. He is the smoke-filled room story. He is a man that wanted to be the kingmaker of the 1920 campaign. He is staying in the hotel where men smoking cigars are coming and going, and he says people came to my room, the smoke-filled room, to get my opinions. What do I want to see happen? And of course, George Harvey coincidentally tells this story of his opinions after the election takes place. So obviously he knew who was going to win, and he obviously picked the right person. He's the one that gets that story going. But Daugherty's, again, never afraid to kind of make people lead on to think that, well, maybe I did it. And it's just constantly holding on because Harry wants to be important. He wants to make you think he's important, but he's not always that important. So Warren gets the nomination. We're in full swing with the 1920 campaign. Who's doing what? Daugherty is the head campaign manager. Manington is setting up the Chicago headquarters. He's also dealing with Washington, D.C. headquarters for Warren's campaign. He is the fund collector. He is also the possibly a campaign secretary. I've only seen this acknowledged in newspapers that they're saying that Manington proofread all of Warren's speeches, and Manington was really just right there next to Daugherty and Warren. He's leading the charge. I'm not sure how intricate he really is involved, but he is definitely here. In fact, behind us, there's the yellow house. You can see the garage from here. That would be George Christian Sr.'s home, the father of George Christian Jr., personal friend and secretary to Warren. Manington is staying in that house during the campaign period. They're also saying that Manington's managing the newspaper men and kind of keeping them all in check, which kind of makes sense. If he has a newspaper background, he's going to be also involved with them. And Jess Smith is the bookkeeper. He's very good with books. Very, very good. And he starts creating accounts called Jess Smith Extra. These are fandom accounts that are going to be funding campaign money through them, and he runs it through Washington Courthouse and Harry Daugherty's brother's bank, Mal Daugherty's National Bank of Ohio. Remember Jess Smith Extra. We will definitely be seeing that again. But down on the left there, we see Harry right in front of the front porch, enjoying his time in the sunlight. And we also have Jess Smith sitting on a park bench with Florence Harding. That was taken right back over by the gables over that direction, if I'm not mistaken. Jess is going to develop a kind of a close relationship with Florence to a certain extent. Some are saying she's right there next to her. Others are saying that they knew each other. They are familiar. I've seen letters that they have in Fayette County Historical Society of Florence sending a letter to Jess saying, I heard you're not feeling well. I hope you feel better soon. Things like that. So they are cordial. There's also stories of Jess doing upholstery shopping for Florence because he loves upholstery so much. But I'm not quite sure to what level that goes. And this is going to take us to Warren being elected president, and Harry Daugherty is going to be named Attorney General. This is the swearing in of Harry Daugherty for his Attorney Generalship movement. If you can push it. One more time. In this picture, we have all of our major players. You see Jess Smith on the left, Howard Manington right over top of Harry Daugherty's shoulder, and there's Mal Daugherty in the back right corner there. They're all there. These are chummy buddies that are going to stay together throughout this entire adventure until it gets a little bit less than convenient. But the point of this picture is you can see Harry's keeping his associates close once he hits Washington, D.C. So now we got Attorney General. This is where we're going to start picking up with the HBO series. We start seeing what Harry's doing as Attorney General. This is a picture of him at his desk in the Justice Department. I know Sherry particularly loves the picture of Warren on his desk because he's a strong supporter of Warren. But And then you see Harry giving his normal approach of, love me, but no one loves me. Of course, I get no credit for a thing of that sort. I did not want any, but it goes to show you how things work. He has a little bitter sense about him. But let's talk a little bit about what he's doing as Attorney General. As Attorney General, he's supposedly earning $12,000 a year. That's a very good salary for that time. In office, he appoints William J. Burns as a head of the Department of Justice of Bureau of Investigation. This is the forerunner of the FBI. Burns is going to be replaced by J. Edgar Hoover. So this is the beginning of that process. Burns is also important because Burns is the man that hires Gaston Means. And for those of you who are not familiar with Gaston Means, he is a slimy person that no one really wants to deal with, but we'll deal with him in a little bit as well. He is known for breaking a railroad workers' strike. He actually procures an injunction, getting a stop and desist for the railroad workers striking because he said that at least $100 million was lost in work, whether it be from people not being able to go to work stopping on the railroads, goods not being transported. He's the man that stopped that from happening from a 5-month strike, and he's not afraid to tell you that I did it, and people hate me because of it, and the communists are out to get me because I did this. And the communists are his go-to. He likes to play that McCarthy card as well. But he also works towards stopping discriminative practices in employers. He is the driving force in pardoning Eugene Debs, the leader of the Socialist Party of that time, who's jailed during the World War I for anti-patriotic events because he was protesting against involvement in World War I. And I've seen two different things. He says, I wanted Debs out. He needed to be out. He deserved to be out. I met with him. He was such a nice guy. He had a good soul. He deserved to be out. But then you see letters and correspondence where he says, I don't want this guy out at all. So he has his two faces with this. But he says, he talks to Warren, and they come to an agreement that he's going to be, he suggests that Debs be released on December 31st of 1921. We're going to pardon him, we're going to commute his sentence, we're going to release him for the start of the year. Warren says, let's move it to Christmas. Let him be home with his family on Christmas Day. And there's a picture of Debs in the upper corner there. Daugherty is known for many, many judicial appointments, and very credible appointments at that. And he also is the first person to publicly press for separate women's prisons. Up until that time, they were either together or women were held in different holding areas, but never was there a distinct women's prison until he started pushing towards that. And the bottom right there is actually a newspaper photo of men walking off the job for the railroad strike in 1922, in case you were curious about that as well. Now, Daugherty is very insecure. He will, again, to your face tell you, I am so important, look at what I'm doing, but behind the scenes he'll sit there and say, no one cares about me. But then he'll switch that again if he thinks that'll get him more sympathy or people will go along with him. But in a personal letter to his friend Peter Dune, he says that, this is referring to Warren, never took any advice from me about anything. He never listens to me, never pays any attention to me, doubts my loyalty to him. He doesn't see how I'm serving him or the government, and on the whole considers me of very little good. I guess he's right. Nobody at the White House cares for me but Mrs. Harding, and she takes a delight in rubbing me in the wrong way, good-naturedly, every time I see her. I can't quarrel with a woman, so I take it out on the dog. Now, if you ever read his book with the Harding tragedy, he will tell you how Warren's always coming to me. He's asking me for everything, and I tell him, you don't need me, but I'll give him my advice. And then you read these personal letters at the time, his views of things kind of change a little bit, and it's always very convenient. But I think this is that true insight of how Harry felt as Attorney General. And I think he wanted to be important. I think he's pushing to be that best Attorney General he can be. He wants to continue to make that name for himself, but he falls short. And this is a great example of how he really is feeling internally while he's trying to deal with these issues. So what's Jess doing while this is all happening? Up there is a picture of the Wardman Park Hotel in Washington, D.C. Jess and Harry are staying on the left side, third floor from the top, about middle way in. If you call the Wardman Park Hotel and ask them to go take a picture of the room, they will hang up on you or hope that you go away. I learned that. Also, if you ever want to try to find Jess Smith's desk that may have been at one point in the Filipino embassy and you call them, they are very unhelpful and very poor at speaking English. So do not do that one either. But Jess is staying in the Wardman Park Hotel with Harry Daugherty, and Jess is still paying all the bills. He is taking care of all the money coming and going. At one point, it is claimed that Harry's trying to get Jess Smith appointed as Director of Indian Affairs. I've never really seen full truth of that, but there is a story floating around. And there was also a story that said that Harry was pushing for Jess to be Secretary of the Treasury at one point, which would never happen in a million years. But then again, it contradicts itself. It got one saying that Daugherty's saying, I want Jess Smith as this. But then you get the next thing in his book saying, oh, I was talking to Warren about how Mellon's a great choice for this. So you don't know what to believe half the time. But Jess is his personal aide. Jess has a desk outside of Harry's office in the Justice Department. He has no official job. He has no title. He receives no pay officially. But he is the guy that's going to be, there's 10 people lining up that want to talk to Harry Daugherty, and Daugherty doesn't want to talk to any of them. Jess is going to be the guy that's going to take them out to lunch and get them to kind of calm down and say, come back later. Jess is going to be the guy that if Harry says, I really need somebody to go run down to Johns Hopkins and help my wife with something, Jess is the one to go do it. And he is the guy that's personally taking care of Mrs. Daugherty throughout her stay at Johns Hopkins. He's going to take her from Johns Hopkins to the hotel to spend time during Christmas and take her back. Harry's not doing that stuff. Jess is. He's that, again, that confidant that's really trying to be there to help him. And this is going to take us to the little greenhouse on K Street. You've probably heard of this place. That's a picture of it on the left there. It's a very nice house. It's 1625 K Street in Northwest in Washington, D.C. It is rented by Howard Manington. Manington is known as the Fixer. It is believed that this place is a political brokerage because we found in a newspaper article saying that Manington's job in Washington, D.C. is to look at appointments, various lower-level appointments, that they're going to come and talk to Manington. They're going to come to K Street. And the same article is saying that at K Street, this is where Manington's going to hang out, Jess Smith, Harry Daugherty, and this is going to be that place. This is going to be Warren's kitchen cabinet. This is going to be his closest confidants and talking to. And this paper goes to another step that this is what we found yesterday. And I never would have imagined this. If anyone's ever been familiar with a man named Colonel Edward House. Edward House was the personal advisor to Woodrow Wilson. House helps create policy. House travels with him to Europe during the Treaty of Paris. Very influential individual to Woodrow Wilson's administration. This paper is describing Manington as Harding's Colonel House. But there's no proof, there's no other research that says Manington's involved with any of this stuff. But you're starting to see that Manington is using this kind of this vision that people are seeing as him, as they're going to come talk to him. He's going to be very important. They're going to talk to him so they think they can get to Daugherty, who they think they can get to Warren. And the question comes up during a trial, and this is done with the testimony of M. Kraft Miller. M. Kraft Miller is a Republican conventionist, or delegate during the 1920 convention. He's higher in Republican politics. Most people will not remember him, but he is brought in for various trials dealing with Daugherty later on. And he was asked that was this money paid to Manington because he was close to the Attorney General and had influence with him, and his answer was yes. People believe that if you gave money to Manington, you got somewhere. And Manington never says, Daugherty says, I never helped Manington do any of this stuff. I never did any of these things. But there's a case where it says that Manington asked Daugherty for a memorandum to be put together for Colonel William Howard. He was the gentleman that was prosecuting cases against the U.S. Major tobacco company in the United States. Manington was able to get the prosecuting attorney's whole dossier to give to the tobacco companies, and Daugherty provided that to him. But Daugherty said, well, I didn't know he was going to do that. I just helped a friend. So there's all sorts of slimy things going on. But supposedly there's a lot of alcohol deliveries coming here. There's stories that we've got carriages driven by federal officers with cases and cases of whiskeys and rum in the back, and they're dropping it off at K Street because it's no big deal. That's what they do at K Street. And then you also have stories of Jess Smith sitting in the basement counting money, singing, "Oh, how the money rolls in." And, I mean, it goes into a whole different direction, but the part that's kind of ironic about it is after everyone's gone, it becomes a frat house for George Washington University. And in the basement for initiations, they had to drink bootleg booze until they got sick in the basement of K Street. So the folklore lived on well after they left. But K Street becomes that well-known item of this group. But the part that I enjoy in particular is what brought him there. The story that Manington was living in a hotel up until then. And Manington, again, being so important. This is very important. A bellhop lost his pants that he was going to wear to an important meeting. And according to this paper, all political affairs, international and domestic, stopped because Howard Manington had no pants. And because of that experience, he said, I cannot possibly live in this hotel anymore, and he found K Street. So had that bellhop possibly found those pants a little bit quicker, we might be talking about the little green room in the hotel as opposed to K Street. So, there is booze running around, illicit booze. Is it going through K Street? Probably. Who's taking what? Who's going where? We don't know. We need to figure out what's going on. This is through the testimony of Jon Garoni. Jon Garoni is the president of the Alps Drug Company in New York. He is questioned about the illicit deals at K Street and where Daugherty fits in, where's Jess Smith and Manington, and he tells the story of what happens to an average case of whiskey. It costs $15 to purchase this case of whiskey. Now, $4 is going to go to the prohibition director, who's going to turn a blind eye to releasing this whiskey legally. $2 are going to go to Howard Manington because he's the one dealing with this specific deal, and he's going to split that 3 ways, and supposedly 67 cents of every deal went to Jess Smith. No one ever knows where the third split goes. Supposedly that's Daugherty, but no one ever points blank says Daugherty's getting that 67 cents per case. $1 is going to go to the druggist who's willing to sign off on this and put his name on the paperwork, and on the right you can see a copy of the prescription order to release the whiskey. $1 is going to go to Jon Garoni, who is the gentleman we were talking about, for allowing this to continue. 50 cents is going to go to Special Assistant to the Attorney General, David Lesperance. $3.25 will go to Will Orr. And this was dealing with the deal in New York City, so that's why Orr is popping up. He's the secretary to the governor, so he's going to help arrange some papers to be filed in certain areas or missing in certain areas. Another $3.25 are going to go to Owen Murphy, Orr's partner. So you see, this is a very detailed organization, but it all starts with Manington to an extent. If you follow and believe every one of this, Manington's going to help facilitating this. He's going to get the whiskey in. He's going to coordinate that. You come talk to me. I'll get you this paperwork. I'll get you this. And past that, they're promising, Jess Smith and Manington are supposedly promising that if you get arrested, or they're going to come for you, don't worry. We work with the Justice Department. We'll get you past this. Just give me a couple more bucks. We'll get you past this. And there's a gentleman by the name of George Remus. If you've seen the show, he's the man that speaks in the third person constantly. He's a big bootlegger out of Philadelphia. George Remus pays Jess Smith $100,000 saying that if I get caught, this is my insurance, you're going to get me off. Well, Remus gets caught, and Jess Smith is trying so hard to get him out of it, but can't. So Jess Smith eventually says, well, I'm going to get in trouble, and just walks away. But keeps the $100,000, of course, because you don't want to give that back. But we're starting to now get into an interesting stage. We're starting to see that there's a lot of weird, slimy deals going on. But we're going to get into the strange death of Jess Smith. There you can see the portrayal from the show. Jess Smith in the TV show, they're trying to show you that Gaston Means snuck in and he's going to murder him in his sleep because, you know, Daugherty wants him dead. That's a little over the top and too coincidental that everyone's running together. But I kind of want to talk about, it's standardly considered that Jess Smith considered suicide, and I want to kind of pose that that might not be true. And I keep going back and forth myself whether it's suicide or death. And if you go to Fayette County and you ask them their opinion, they all say it's suicide. I asked a couple people, older generations are actually, which is kind of interesting, 5 out of 15 people I asked said he killed himself because he was gay. They were very upset about that down in Fayette County, but others said that he was doing seedy things, he was depressed, Daugherty shot him. So one person told me that Harry Daugherty knocked on the door and shot him right in the face and then walked out as quickly as possible. There's so much stories going around, but I want to give you the facts and let you kind of come up with that. So we know that Jess Smith is starting to have issues with Harry Daugherty. They're not doing quite as well as they used to. And they start having a falling out, and Dr. Joel Boone, Harding's personal physician, aside from Charles Sawyer, says that he had heard that if he doesn't, heard Daugherty saying that, referring to Jess Smith, if he does not stop throwing his weight around the department, he will have to move out of the apartment. Jess Smith might be overstepping his bounds. There's also a story that Daugherty was so mad at Jess Smith for waking him up in the middle of a nap that he was so angry that he left him in Washington and Fayette County and made him find his own way home. But Jess Smith is starting to feel a little bit beaten up, a little bit down of how he's being kicked around by Harry Daugherty. And May 24th or 25th in 1923, he stops at a store in Washington Courthouse and buys a revolver. And he tells the shopkeeper, coincidentally, this is for Harry. Now, who knows how true that is? It just seems very coincidental, but he does buy a gun. Yes? To understand Jess a little bit more, he is going through a lot of changes in his life over the course of when we first introduced him to now. He has developed diabetes. It's the same problem as his mother, and he's having a lot of issues with diabetes. His weight, his blood pressure, everything's going all off the charts. He is actually getting paranoid from the diagnosis. He thinks he's going to imminently die. He has a surgery to remove his appendix in Mount Carmel, and there's a picture of it during the times in the 20s, on May 13th, 1922. And to be able to get this appendix removed from appendicitis, he has to get his diabetes under control, which he can't. And he's freaking out again. My health is so bad. Look at this, look at this. Well, he finally gets it to a point that he can have his appendix removed, but it never fully heals, the incision. And it actually starts teetering on a gangrenous infection. And he's always constantly trying to take care of himself. He's wearing a truss for the rest of his life from 1922 until he's dead in 1923 to keep the incision completely compacted in hopes of staying healthy, staying clean. And his personality's changing. He's not he's much more grim, he's much more depressed. He is at the point that Harry wants to take Jess with him on that Western trip with Warren Harding when they do their big Alaskan voyage. And he puts him on the guest list, and Warren removes him, saying that this is not a man that needs to be accompanying us anymore. And there's stories of Warren telling Harry to get Jess out of Washington, D.C. His life is crumbling a little bit. Jess? And this is going to take us to May 30th to 31st in 1923. And this is where my research has kind of compiled a couple different things. This is, to the best of my knowledge, what happened May 30th to the 31st. He got up in the morning on May 30th, and he plays golf with Harry Daugherty, Dr. Joel Boone, and Daugherty's assistant, Barney Martin. Joel Boone is saying that he is extremely disoriented, almost to the point that he is walking up to the ball wobbling and hitting the ball the wrong direction. And they can't figure out what's quite wrong. Something's not right with him, and they're not sure what. But Joel Boone is convinced that he's nervous, like he's doing something wrong. He knows it, and he's panicking. Jess Smith is making several appointments from May 31st. So the next day, he's making a long list of people he's going to meet with. At 10 p.m., he calls Ned McLean. That's the gentleman on the left. Evelyn Walsh McLean on the right. Everyone should know her. Famous socialite, owner of the Hope Diamond, close friend of Florence Harding. He calls up Ned, who he's friends with, at 10 p.m. and says, I need to get out of town, and I really want to come down by you. And he's staying in his farm in Virginia and said, I really want to come down to you. Can I come down? And Ned asks Evelyn, and they say, well, yeah, you can come on down tonight. Go for it. Well, he calls back a little bit later and says, there's a storm coming. I can't, it's getting so nasty, I'm not going to try. I'll come in the morning. I have to come in the morning. And they say, that's fine. At midnight, he calls the McLeans again, panicking, wanting to talk to Ned, but Ned's asleep, so he speaks to Evelyn, saying, I'm really upset. I can't wait to see you. I need to see you. And Evelyn says, it's okay, don't worry about it. And the last thing he tells Evelyn is, I'll be at the farm at 7 o'clock, meaning the next morning. Jess is found at 6 a.m. in his pajamas and his bathrobe, dead, bullet hole in his head, and he was slumped over on a bed with his head in a waste paper basket, which is a little peculiar how he lands in this manner. But you read the chain of events, this doesn't sound like somebody... Exactly. Now, Alice Roosevelt, who's a charming woman who always comes up with nasty remarks, did say publicly that Jess dies of hardening of the arteries for that night, and bad taste, of course. But let's kind of go through some odd facts here, because I want to try to figure out if this is suicide or murder. And this is why I go back and forth. So we find Jess Smith dead. There's no autopsy done. Bill Burns, we talked about him at the beginning, the head of the Bureau of Investigation, lives one floor down. And overnight, Harry Daugherty's in the White House. And there's different stories. Harry says, I wasn't feeling well, but the president needed me, so I went to the White House, and I stayed there that night. There's another story that said, Harry told Jess, I want you out of the apartment, and I don't want to look at your face, so I'm going to stay in the White House until you're gone. Either way, he has his secretary, Barney Martin, staying in the apartment just to watch out for Jess in case. And Barney's the first person to find Jess Smith dead. And Barney's kind of interesting because he says he heard a door slam, which turned out to be the bullet shot. And I don't know how you can misinterpret a bullet shot in the next room as a door slam, but this is the story that goes. Well, Bill Burns comes in and he takes care of the investigation, and you think he should be because he's the head of the Bureau of Investigation. He misplaces the gun. I don't know where it is. And people are getting kind of confused. What's going on with this? Then we start entering the bullet question. Dr. Joel Boone says he shot himself in the right side of the head, which makes sense. Jess Smith is right-handed, so you'd go, boom. Roxy Stinson, his ex-wife, actually came to Washington, D.C. to ID the body, said the bullet went through the left side of the head. The Washington coroner's report, Washington, D.C. coroner's report, which I dug up, said it also went through the left side of the head. So if you're right-handed, you wouldn't do this. So where are we on that? Maybe it's a mistake. I don't know.
Bullet went into the door jam, so if it went in the head, where did it come out the head?
Well, they're saying it went, according to the coroner's report, went inside the left, out the right, through the door, into the door frame. But they said there was all these problems in the right side of the cheek that kind of exploded on the exit. So this person is shooting straight on. So if you're a right-handed person, you're not going to do that. If you have a bad left hand, you're not used to shooting with your left hand, you wouldn't do this in a perfect shot. It's very mysterious. And then Roxy is staying beyond that. There's no gunpowder on his hand. There should have been gunpowder residue from the gun. They can't find that. But the coroner also says, well, I got extra information. When I was filling out my report, they asked him, well, where'd you get this information? Oh, I don't remember. So it's very kind of weird. Then we also have this, Jess is very edgy coming up to this. Gaston Means claims, and of course Means you can only take with a certain grain of salt. Means is saying that Jess Smith was also the bookkeeper for their illicit bootlegging. So people were getting nervous that Jess was getting a little maybe too nervous, and they were afraid he was going to turn over his really good books to the government and maybe use that as a chance to get immunity from all this. Maybe, I don't know, it's a long drawn out story. Well, Roxy's also saying a week before Jess came to see her, he's freaking out that cars are following him. He's asking her to help him destroy his personal papers and telling her what papers to destroy. This sounds like a guy that's scared of being murdered. And then the biggest, what I feel is a very damning effect to it, I guess take it for what it's worth, William Orr. He's a gentleman we talked about before dealing with that scenario of buying the whiskey case. William Orr is being convicted because of his dealings with liquor. And Howard Manington tells a story that he came charging down, William Orr came charging down to Manington saying, I want my money back. Manington says, well, you paid us this money for insurance, but it's, it was to hold me as retainer as a lawyer. I don't have to give you that back. And he says, I'm going to get my money back whether I have to kill you or Jess Smith to get it. So, where that goes, I don't know. It's kind of touch and go. So this is where I'm on the fence. I don't know if he got shot. I don't know if he committed suicide. I go back and forth every time I read something. This leads us to the strange aftermath of his death. Jess Smith has two wills. He has the one that's filed, and he has one that he wrote unwitnessed, and that's a copy of it on the right, that they found on his desk in the room where he shot himself. The will that he scribbled out unwitnessed leaves a lot more money to the Daughertys and Roxy Stinson. So, of course, Roxy says, this is the will that there has to be this will. But in the end, the courts say, no, this doesn't make sense. We're going to go with the original will. And I thumbed through that will, and it splits up his estate that's valued at $214,000 at that time. Today, roughly, with inflation, that's $2.98 million worth of estate. Jess Smith had a lot of money. Now, oddly enough, he has Harry Daugherty and Mal Daugherty be the executors of his will. The courts are saying this doesn't sound right, we can't do this. And they're looking for anyone to step up to be the executor of the will, and no one wants it. So, at the end of the day, the court says, well, we certainly can't let Harry do it, but we'll let Mal do it. So Mal Daugherty, the brother of Harry, is being the executor of the will. And now they're going through these phantom accounts that Jess has about 20, 30 phantom accounts in Mal Daugherty's bank, including Jess Smith Extra. Now, Jess Smith Extra is still up and running. The campaign's been done for 3 years, but there's still money going into Jess Smith Extra. And then there's other money in there in different accounts that Roxy says, well, I know it may say, like, Frank so-and-so, but that's mine. That's my money. That's Jess put it on there so people don't know it's mine, but that's my money. So now they're going to argue, whose money is this? And I believe the big one was Hayes 54, was I believe what they called the one file that Roxy says is mine. Well, the courts battle it out, and the court says, you know, it's not your money, Roxy, it's the estate's. So now the Daughertys have control more of the money. And it starts going a little bit more awkward when it comes to the Washington Courthouse property. They have to sell the building of Jess Smith's store. They advertise out in the papers that there's going to be a one-day public auction, cash in hand only. And they put it out in the papers. I've seen the articles. The day of the auction comes, one woman comes ready to buy the building, cash in hand, and it's coincidentally Mal Daugherty's wife. It's very slimy. It just leaves a very sour taste in your mouth. But even though you take all this aside, the people of Washington Courthouse are devastated with the loss of Jess Smith. Very, very sad. And at the funeral service, which I found this particularly moving, the Reverend Arch Nicholson read out, I wish that we might fully honor the battle that went on in his soul, the passionate and uncontrollable desire that burned within, the visions and longings that gripped his very life in such a way to make him willing to burst the bonds that held him enslaved, that he might be free, and made him desire, above all else, to move out of the cramped apartments of the physical and decaying body and out into the boundless mansions of the spiritual world. Wow. Very powerful. But at poor Jess Smith's funeral, Daugherty does not come. Harry does not make it out there, saying he's too ill. He does send some flowers. And the list of people sending flowers are interesting. The Sawyers, Carl Sawyer sent the flowers. Charles didn't want to send flowers, but Carl did. And you've got the Hardings send things out there. George Christian Jr. was physically there, and the flowers. It was a big loss. People felt the loss, and they knew things were going on, but Washington Courthouse took the loss of him particularly badly. So Jess Smith is gone. We have to get rid of another person. Warren's going to pass away during his Western trip, sadly. And Harry was originally going to go on the trip, but decided to hold back. He wasn't quite feeling well, but promised Warren that he would meet him up in California and all those things, which never happened, blah, 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 blah. Warren passes away. Calvin Coolidge succeeds him as president. Daugherty feels his job is in jeopardy. We're not too far off from the 1924 election, and he knows that Coolidge says, I'm going to keep the cabinet intact during this term. And he wants to make sure he gets on the next time. So he starts promising things to Coolidge and showing him, look how great I am. He's showing him his success and retrieving money from the war debts. Look at all the money. I'm persecuting people. I'm bringing this back into the government. And he says, you know what? Warren was great, but you're even better. I really like you, Cal. I really like you. And then he says, you know what? The 24 election's coming along. I'm big in Ohio politics. I can get you Ohio. And a president can't win without Ohio. You need me to get Ohio. Coolidge isn't quite so concerned about Harry and what he's offering. 1924 is a very bad year for poor Harry Daugherty. And this is where I have issues that one day I hate Harry Daugherty's guts, the next day I feel really sad for him. Then you hate him again, then you really feel sad for him. 1924, his wife is going to finally pass away from pneumonia. The 1924 Republican Convention he's going to attend, and he thinks he still has this powerful swing. And when they're naming the chair for the convention, he is dead last in the 7 people nominated. And he was only nominated almost as a pity. He really feels defeated and realizes when he's asking people, hey, go nominate me, tell them. They're telling him, you know, we can't do this, Harry. And he realizes he's losing his control. And then we have Draper drama. Draper Daugherty is Harry's son. That's a picture of him on the right with silent film actress Clara Bow. Why he met up with Clara Bow, I don't know. He is known to be a womanizer, and Draper is going to be one of the biggest headaches to poor Harry. Draper is an alcoholic. He is going to run around running up debts, issues, and at one point he starts having a relationship with a showgirl who gets murdered. Now, he didn't have anything to do with the murder to the best of my knowledge, but the showgirl's brother says, hey, you know what, I'm going to release the newspapers that you guys were close, but I know your dad's in the Justice Department. You get me a job in the Justice Department, I won't say anything about how you guys know each other. So Draper goes to the police, oddly enough, and doesn't help it. The man gets arrested, Draper gets nervous, so he runs down to Mexico. He comes back a little bit later, once he thinks things cool down, and Draper's wife, so he's married with the showgirl girlfriend, and his Uncle Mal commit him to a sanatorium in Connecticut to get him dry. And while there, he admits reluctantly, you know, when I drink really hard, I tend to write checks for money that I don't have, and it gets me in a lot of trouble. Well, he stayed there for a while and said I had enough, so he escapes the sanatorium. He runs to Chicago, lives under a fake name until the debtors can find him and drag him back to New York City. And that's where he meets Thomas Feldman, the owner of the New York Life Insurance Company. Thomas Feldman says, I feel bad for you, Draper. I know things are rough. I'm going to pay off your debts. I'm going to find you a job in my company. We're going to get you right on your feet again. Draper's very thankful for this. Coincidentally, Thomas Feldman is working with the Glass Casket Company that's under fire for fraud. And the Glass Casket Company pays him, and Gaston Means, of course, $63,000 to get them out of trouble. So Thomas Feldman calls up Harry Daugherty and says, hey, you're the head of the Justice Department. Look what I did for your son. I didn't even tell you about this. Make this glass casket thing disappear. And Harry kind of hees and haws and gets around it, saying, I can't do it. And eventually, he tells Draper, get out of there, get completely out of this mess. And Thomas Feldman keeps on pushing the issue until eventually he is actually convicted. He tries to call Harry's bluff, but nothing comes of it. And Draper kind of fades off into obscurity again. But for that year in 1924, he is giving him a hell of a headache. And not too many people hear about Draper. This is going to lead us to the Daugherty trials, and I'm going to try to condense all these things. These are a couple different ones. These are congressional hearings saying he needs to be removed from office, and also corruption charges, dealing especially with the American Metals Company's case, saying that he's collecting money. Well, Daugherty's been dead for a few years. They can't find him. But they're saying that he's taking money away from governmental agencies that are trying to re-secure seized property during World War I and return it to the proper owners. And they're saying Daugherty's getting a piece of that as well. But they're also saying he's bribing people, he's accepting bribes, he's abusing his power mostly by not doing anything and allowing these groups to do these types of things. And that he may have been involved in Teapot Dome. That's the big buzzword. Teapot Dome's coming around. So they're saying Daugherty must have been involved because they're saying that Fall must have asked Daugherty for his opinion, because Fall says he does. And Daugherty says, I never gave a written opinion on whether he should sell these give these properties to these people or sell them. And I would have done it if I was the Attorney General. So his name's popping up really hard, really fast. And then also, they're saying he's making $12,000 a year, but they start looking at his expenses, and it's $50,000 a year. So how can he afford that? And in these trials, we have sensational testimonies by Roxy Stinson, we've talked about her on the left, and Mr. Gaston Means on the right. So we got to talk about Gaston real quick. I will not give him as much time as he so dutifully deserves. I will tell you that, but I want to make sure we talk about a little bit. On the left, he's played by Stephen Root in the TV show. Stephen Root, for those of you that like King of the Hill, he does the voice of Bill of King of the Hill, in case you're curious, which makes you kind of second-guess Gaston Means. He is a swindler, a con man. He is well known for being a private investigator, and it's kind of funny that I found these pictures. On the left, that's him with his wife, Julie Patterson Means, and on the right is his son, William. They have a little girl named Julia, too. But this is a reason I like to show these pictures. He kind of looks like a normal person, except on the left, he looks very similar to Bozo the Clown in that photo, I think. But he still looks like the average person, not this evil swindler that everyone knows him to be. But he's a well-known private investigator. But he always does these things that it's amazing he dodges these problems. He claims he's brought up on every charge possible, and he gets out of it. The big one is he is brought up on charges of murder. He had to have committed this murder. There's no way he couldn't have committed this murder. There's a woman named Mrs. Maud King, and she hires Means to be her legal advisor and her financial advisor. And just so happens Mrs. King's husband dies and leaves her a $10 million trust. Now, Means works for the insurance company also, and is trying to find ways to help both parties. Well, one day, Gaston Means goes rabbit hunting with Mrs. King, and they go out into the woods. He comes back later carrying her dead body and says, she shot herself in the back of the head. And they go to court, and the insurance firm he worked for sends their best lawyers, and the jury of his neighbors in North Carolina says, well, maybe he didn't do it. And they let him off.
Because the lawyers were from New York, that alone made sure they weren't going to convict.
Exactly. So Means is getting away with things. Now Means is going to make names for himself looking for German spies and working both sides of the field with his friend William Burns, and both of them are working for the United States and Germany, spreading different facts to one another to help their clients before World War I hits. And Means is eventually going to be brought up saying that, we're being paid for these investigations, but you're not doing anything. Then they start convicting him for this fraud. And he says, I have a full trunk full of proof of these German spies. They said, well, okay, we want you to bring it. I'll bring it for you next time. So he comes to the next trial date. Well, Mr. Means, where's your proof? It's not here? No. One of your men came to find it. They picked it up. We never sent anyone. My enemies are out to get me. Let me go out there and find them. And they let him go find them again. And he goes and keeps on doing these things. And this is going to, the reason we know him around here is he writes the book, The Strange Death of, it's ghostwritten for him, but The Strange Death of Warren G. Harding. And this is where he starts claiming that Florence and Charles Sawyer are poisoning Warren. And this is where you get the birth of the murder from the wife story, is through Gaston Means, who openly admits later, yeah, I made it up, ha ha ha, but it's already out there. And it's a well-published book. But Gaston Means also goes to the next step of going back to Evelyn Walsh McLean, who we met before. She wants to help find the Lindbergh baby. Everyone knows about Charles Lindbergh's baby being kidnapped. And Means, after serving time in the Atlanta penitentiary, tells Evelyn Walsh McLean, I talked to criminals in there. I know where the baby is. And she wants to find the baby so bad, she gives him $100,000 to give to for ransom to get the baby back. And he says, I'll go get it. And he runs all over the place saying he's going to find this baby. He can't procure the baby. Says, give me another $4,000 of expense money. I'll find this baby. They give him the money, goes around. Says, I need $35,000 more to prove that find this baby. Coincidentally, Charles Lindbergh finds the dead baby. And Means says, that's not the baby. It can't be the baby. I'll find the baby. And he gets arrested for it, saying he's defrauding Evelyn Walsh McLean again. And he goes to prison for this. Now, while in prison, he's going to be moved to Alcatraz, and he was supposed to have a cell next to Al Capone, supposedly. But he ends up getting too sick to be transferred. But while in prison, towards the end there, he wants to be noticed so badly that he says, I shot the Lindbergh baby. I killed him. Just to get people to notice him some more. He just keeps on clinging for people to notice him, and it never happens. And he dies in prison from a heart attack and never leaves prison. So Gaston Means Very interesting guy, but he actually becomes romanticized in North Carolina. There's newspaper articles out there that in the 60s that call him America's greatest rascal. They start trying to say how wonderful he is towards the end. So we got to talk about the trials a little bit. That is my favorite picture of Gaston Means, by the way. He tries to tuck his thumbs in like the stereotypical lawyer, like the Southern lawyer. And they ask him about things, and he says that he was directed to investigate Senators Caraway and LaFollette after they attacked Daugherty, and he says that Jess Smith told him to do that. And in this during this questioning, Senator Wheeler asks, "You have never gone through my offices, have you?" Means answers, "If someone will assign me to do it, I will." And Wheeler says, "Senator Moses suggests to me that I can save time by asking you what senators you have not investigated." And Means says, "Oh, there's lots that I haven't." So it's kind of, he's making almost a show of it to really make him seem like that center of attention again. He talks about these bizarre practices, saying that Jess Smith is helping him coordinate taking in this money for this alcohol that he would set up in two hotel rooms in New York City, and there'd be a fishbowl in the one room, and he'd hide in the other one. And they'd come and drop the money in the fishbowl, and he would just look through a peephole and know to take the money. And Jess Smith told him that's how it's supposed to be. It's such a weird story, and you don't know what's true or not because Means a habitual liar. But he also says Jess Smith and Howard Manington net $180,000 transporting what's called the Dempsey Carpenter fight film. Back in those days, it's according to the Roddenberry Acts, it's illegal to transport films of fights, prize fights, across state lines. And supposedly, Jess Smith and Manington accepted bribes to help facilitate this going, and supposedly Warren sat in the White House and watched this film as well. So of course everyone's got to pull everyone into it. Didn't happen. But he is throwing out a lot of really big claims about what's going on and what's not going on. Then we ask Roxy. Now Roxy is almost a sensational person of this trial. She is still considered very beautiful. They said that she has, you can't tell that she's concerned, but when she smiles, she has teeth that belong in a toothpaste advertisement. She is just so gorgeous. And they are just completely vexed by her stories, and she's talking about how Smith talked about these problems at the shack. That's where Harry Daugherty vacationed with Jess Smith, was down there, that they were fighting all the time, and that Jess Smith he was being beaten up by Daugherty, and Daugherty wanted him dead. And she was also very surprised to hear how much money Jess Smith had and how, well, maybe she deserves a little bit of it. And then she talks about how Daugherty was trying to silence her, that she was baited to go to Cleveland by a Mr. L. Frink to meet him about a business deal. And when she got up there to this hotel in Cleveland, she discovered that he put her down in a joint room under a fake name. And Daugherty said, "Oh, look at it. She's getting around with gentlemen. You can't trust her. You can't trust her." And she said that will not silence her. It's such a blown out story. And then Roxy is also a little confused. They ask her to go into specifics, and she goes, "Well, I don't really remember everything." And I get confused when people ask me a lot of questions and things like that. But she knows whiskey and drugs went through K Street and that Daugherty was involved with every little bit of it. And then we ask, where's Howard Manington? We're trying to find him. The courts want to find him. They know he's an important part of this conversation, but they can't find him, and he's over in Europe. Why is he in Europe? I don't know. Nobody knows. There's stories that he's over there for private business. They're saying he's a part of the Dawes Commission, helping rebuild Europe after World War I. They're saying that Harding told Manington to leave Washington, D.C., so he went to Europe. Daugherty hid him in Europe, so he couldn't testify. But either way, the newspapers are asking, where's Manington? Where's Manington? And it turns into an international search until the U.S. ambassador finds him in France and tells him, we want you to come back. And he says, oh, I'll be happy to come back. I want to testify. I need to testify. And then when he gets there, he says, well, you know, so much information's been out. I can't get a fair testimony. I can't possibly testify. So he tries to back out of it. But he does announce that the Attorney General was never in my house in Washington during the 6 months I occupied it, which goes against what Daniel F. Smith, he is the butler of the house, says, I saw Daugherty there all the time. And I saw Daugherty, I saw the The cart's full of whiskey coming. Smith is one of those thorns in Means' side. Manington never testifies because in that process, Jess, Calvin Coolidge asks for Harry Daugherty's resignation. And at first, Coolidge does not want to ask for the resignation. And he starts feeling like there's something not right. He's getting pressures from various senators. He's getting pressures from his cabinet. At one point, Charles Evans Hughes says that if you don't get Daugherty out of here, I will have every person in this cabinet give you their letter of resignation in one spot. To which Coolidge responded, no, don't do that. It might leave me alone with Daugherty. So he's kind of waiting for his opportunity. And while these questions are coming up about Daugherty in these trials, the investigation asks for him to release Justice Department files, and Daugherty refuses. And Coolidge says, I agree. You shouldn't release those, but you have to understand you are now defending the United States and you're defending yourself. You can't possibly do both. I need you to resign. And he does. He does offer it, but he gives Coolidge a letter of resignation and a personal letter saying how, well, you know, this is really a shame, and I really should keep this job, but I will do this for the greater good of the country. It's one of those little backhanded things. But after he leaves office, the newspapers are ecstatic. As you can see from here, the New York Times says from the first day, Daugherty was a gross misfit. Detroit Free Press, nearly everything he did while in office tended to increase the impression that he was a mistake. So people were not upset that he was leaving. Leaves us to Mal Daugherty. These trials are still going on. Mal Daugherty is starting to be subpoenaed for bank records. And he doesn't want to give them up. And they eventually want some of the ledgers of Harry Daugherty. And he says, well, I'd love to have them for you, but Daugherty burned them in a fit of rage, thinking that they were old campaign records and he wanted to protect Warren. So things are starting to look really shaky again. Then it's asking, slowly going through ledgers, well, what happened to all this money from the 1920 campaign with Jess Smith Extra? It says that you still owe, there should be $60,000 here. Well, Mal says, well, Smith gave me $50,000. Where they came from, I'm not really sure, but he gave them to me. They said, well, why didn't you give the money back to the Republican committees then to pay him back? Oh, I don't know. I just never gave them to him. So again, you're seeing some more seedy things going on. But in the end, Harry will not testify because he says he does not believe he's done anything wrong, at least for his initial hearings. But he does keep on saying that the Wheeler group is coming after him because they're communists. He accuses everyone of being a communist towards the end. But the major case dealing with some, with that American Metals Company case, he is found innocent by acquitted by a hung jury, 11-1. And another man, Thomas Miller, who was tried for the exact same things, does go to prison for it. But Daugherty gets off because one individual said he just wasn't quite sure. And Daugherty says, I am done with politics. I am going to retire to private life and go back to being a lawyer in Columbus. So it's going to take us to after the trials of what's getting left with Harry. Down there on the left is the shack. This is down near Washington Courthouse in Fayette County. And looks very similar to what it is today. But he's going to spend a lot of time down there. He's going to start cycling around and traveling. But he's also going to take time to write the inside story of the Harding tragedy, which he tries to claim is his chance to defend Warren. He needs to tell his story, but a majority of the story is really to defend himself. And that's what he really pushes towards. But throughout that book, he talks about Jess Smith's suicide, never mentions Roxy, and only mentions Manington once, but not by name, just saying he is an associate from Columbus that he worked with briefly at K Street. This is the shack today. That's what it looks like on the inside. You can rent this space at a public park. The table up in the upper right corner, they advertise as perfect for poker games, which I find grossly inappropriate. But they have pictures of Harry Daugherty and Warren in there. When getting these pictures, I invaded someone renting it for a personal graduation party. I started peeping in through the windows, and the guy was thankfully very nice and let me in to take pictures. But I felt bad looking in there. I was peeping in. My wife came with me and said, stop doing that. I said, no one's here. and a guy popped up and asked if they can help me. So, but we got what we wanted out of it, and that's what really matters. So that is the shack as it stands today. Warren may have been there once, maybe spent the night, but this is not something that he frequented as they like to advertise, and a lot of people like to think there's all these seedy things happening at the shack. It's not the case. So Harry's going to spend the rest of his days being very bitter. He does say at one point that getting a man's goat is a great game. I never had a goat farm, and they could never get a goat where there was none. And he is going to become a member of the Harding Memorial Association. He is active in the law practice. He's traveling. He's trying to stay out of the bad weather, going back and forth from Florida to Michigan. He offers a lot of political opinions through correspondence, but his health does start to decline. And he starts relying heavily on Catherine Carroll, his personal secretary. And throughout this, he is starting to work on memoirs with Ray Baker Harris, and they have a lot of letters back and forth, and for a little while you almost like Daugherty. He starts telling all sorts of stories, but the one he keeps on going with a repetitive joke was, I still like my coat. At some point, I don't know if Ray Baker Harris gave him a coat as a present, or he complimented, I like your coat, but for a series of letters he keeps on saying, I'm wearing my coat that you like so much, or I still have that coat, and I really like my coat. And he says at one point, when you're writing this book, remember 3 things that are very important. You're writing this for Warren Harding, and that's important. He needs to be defended. 2, don't take my word for sole advice. Although I was there, you need to take other people's advice. And 3, I still like my coat. He just constantly talks about this, and you almost start liking the guy. But then he gets to a point that he has a stroke. He can't talk, which is ironic for a man that always has an opinion. He's starting to go downhill harder and harder and harder, and eventually he passes away October 13th, 1941. And Ray Baker Harris is still sending letters that are being responded to by his secretary, Catherine Carroll, the secretary, who says of Harry's final moments, until a few days before he died, when he lapsed into a semi-consciousness, General Daugherty knew that the end was approaching, and he met it as he met every crisis in life, without regret or complaint, although Harry complains a lot. On the left there, you can see the Daugherty Mausoleum, where he is buried in Washington Courthouse. He also has a historical marker in the cemetery, and if you read it, you'd almost think Harry wrote it himself, because it's very complimentary to Harry, and mentions a little bit about Jess Smith, who is buried about 100 yards away in his family plot. And not so much fanfare. I guess I was talking to the director of the cemetery, and they said that people look for Harry Daugherty all the time, but no one ever looks for Jess Smith, which I find kind of sad and depressing for poor Jess Smith, but it's kind of what happens, I guess. We need to figure out what happens to Roxy, the cat lady. She is going to remarry. She marries Philip Rast, who is an automotive salesman in Columbus, in September 3rd, 1926. She's going to kind of move around from Oklahoma to Washington Courthouse. Her mother, Eldora, is actually going to die in a car accident. Roxy is in the car with her. Eldora is trying a brand new car for the very first time, test driving it, and she crashes it and dies. Part of me always just gets this weird feeling that Jess is laughing about it. I just always get that feeling. But she is viewed all the way up until she passes in 1973, but she is always viewed as almost ahead of her time. She is wearing slacks when women are wearing skirts. She is smoking publicly as a woman all the way from the 20s up to the 70s. And most importantly, she is the cat lady. She owns a house in Washington Courthouse that supposedly had somewhere between 50 and 75 cats. And the stories that I was told by locals up there, they remember as children, they used to go up, sneak up to the house and bang on the windows, and then you would hear like a tidal wave of going through, and then Roxy would come out and yell at the kids. It was almost a game in the town. But I found out from a couple other people, the retired town sheriff said that it wasn't Roxy that collected the cats, it was her husband, Philip. So I don't know who's collecting the cats, but she is known local as the cat lady. She is going, when she does pass, she leaves an estate totaling $190,000 in 1973. She is doing quite well. But the part that's interesting is she is not buried next to her second husband. She is not buried next to her first husband. She is buried in a small cemetery about 20 miles west of Washington Courthouse next to her mother. So obviously there was a real close attachment still to her mother all the way up till the end. Then finally, what happens to Howard Manington? He kind of just fades off into obscurity. He continues to, he just kind of walks away from all of this without anyone really gunning for him, even though he seems to be just as intricately involved, if not more so. And he continues to work in real estate. He's selling, buying, dealing, and is very successful. The Coshocton Tribune in 1926 wrote a story describing Manington and the Ohio gang, and says of the whole gang, Howard Manington stands out as the only successful survivor. He is rich. He made large sums during his competitively brief stay in Washington. His most remunerative, there we go. I practiced that about 10 times this morning, saying I can get this, but I couldn't. Sortie being his visit to Cuba for the National City Bank to adjust its sugar investments. Why was he chosen for this responsible post? Maybe someday it will be told, although it could be, in my opinion, to get favors through Daugherty, that they offered him that job for that. But apart from Manington, the gang has drifted to a destruction which puts the score on merely human agencies of law and justice. He is the only successful one of this entire story that no one really attacks, and he is currently down in Green Lawn Cemetery next to a tree, and no one knows who he is, not a soul. I went down there and I asked, looking for Howard Manington. Actually, his files were in the wrong place. They aren't even in the right spot. No one cares about. He has successfully faded away from this whole trial and tribulation. And that kind of ends our story. Long-winded, I know, and I appreciate you all sticking around with it. I'd be happy to answer any questions if possible, if anyone has any, to the best of my ability. Yes, Carol? Could be. It very well could be. The only thing, there was one part of it that was almost like a snarky comment of Harry saying to, I almost think it's more of a literal coat, purely because at one point he offers Ray Baker Harris to buy a similar coat for him, and says that I will use the funds that I never stole from the government to buy you this coat. So he gets really snarky about these sorts of things. Might be. Could be very at that point. But I appreciate all of you coming along, staying with us tonight and hearing this long, drawn-out story. I hope you found as much interest in it as I did. And thank you very much.